Greetings, YouTube. One thing you'll hear a lot from the conservative set in America, particularly when there's protests that are going on, protests linked to the latest in a long, endless string of black people that have been murdered by the police, is that you should really go through the proper channels. Now, some of the ones that are saying that is because they really want to believe it. Because for them, the proper channels work. If they go through the proper channels, if they call the manager, things get done. But some of them are saying it because they understand that unless you wrote the proper channels, they're not going to work with it for you. And they are suggesting that as a solution because they understand that it isn't a solution. That expecting black people or women or gay people or trans people to go through the proper channels isn't going to work for them. And that's why they're making the suggestion, because they want the status quo maintained. So if they can convince enough people to go through the proper channels, nothing will change. They won't be inconvenienced, and they won't need to change. And that's the most important thing for them. They don't want to change. They don't want to grow. They don't want the status quo upset. They don't want to undermine the system as it is, because the system as it is benefits them. And they'll keep putting up all these different reasonable suggestions. And then they'll keep moving that goalpost because they don't want the system to change. And if you suggest, for example, to white people in America that, the Boston Tea Party was a riot, and a racist one at that, well, they'll make all kinds of excuses. Well, that's acceptable. But a rebellion in the streets because black Americans are tired of being murdered by cops on a pretty much a daily basis, well, that's just that doesn't happen. We shouldn't have to work. We shouldn't do anything about that. The cops aren't bad. Well, no, they are. The cops are horrible. Because if you've got 10 bad cops out of a 100 cop force, and those other 90 cops are not pigpiling those 10 to get them out, then you've got 100 bad cops. And if the system is set up so that those 90 good cops can't get the bad ones out, then guess what? That's called systemic racism. The system is rigged against black people. It's rigged against women because men wrote the system. It's rigged against gay people because straight people wrote the system. It's rigged against trans people because cis people rigged the system. And you don't want to face it because that means having to, turn your view inward and see how you've been supporting the system of the world around you. How many people are you responsible for making their lives miserable? So you'll hear the ignorant say, don't go through the proper channel because they don't want to face their own complicity. And the ones that wrote the system itself keep saying, go through the proper channels, because they know the proper channels aren't going to work, and they don't want it to work. They don't want the system to change. But some people are willing to tear down the system, tear down the statues, burn down the stores. Because until the system changes, black people and brown people and Asian people and Native American people and women and gay people and trans people and non-Christians are going to continue to be oppressed and crushed. In some cases, literally murdered in the street, dying, gasping for breath as someone kneels on their neck, indifferent to their pleas and their suffering and their life. So fuck the proper channels. The proper channels are done. We need to upend them. And some of you will listen because a really white dude is saying this, even though women and black people have been saying it for centuries. You didn't want to listen to them because for a long time they were easy to ignore. It's getting harder to ignore them now, isn't it? Particularly now that some of the white folks are joining them. Some of the men are joining the women. Some of the men are identifying themselves as intersectional feminists. It's getting harder to ignore them. And that makes the ignorant nervous. That means that the people in charge of the system, all those proper channels, are doubling down. Because frankly, they don't know what else to do. But we have to change the channels. We have to fix the system. We have to achieve justice. So don't tell people to follow the proper channels. Don't expect them to, because the channels haven't worked for them. It's time to change the system, whether you like it or not.